Hey everyone, let's sit together again, grab some coffee and talk about the cloud. In today's video, we are going to do part 2 of the integration of Stripe and AWS EventBridge. We are going to the AWS console, setting up AWS EventBridge partner solution. We are going to the Stripe workbench, and we are also going to set up the connection, and we are going to trigger some test events to AWS EventBridge. In our AWS account, we will connect the EventBridge with other AWS services such as AWS CloudWatch, and then we'll see what is the content of the event we are getting from Stripe. In the end of this video, I'm going to show you some code example in AWS Cloud Development Kit, how you can connect your AWS EventBridge to other services such as AWS step functions, which can be used to trigger Lambda functions in your cloud product. Let's start with going to the Stripe documentation and set up the connection between EventBridge and Stripe. So now I'm here in my browser in the Stripe documentation where we can read the article how to send events to AWS EventBridge from Stripe. As it says here, AWS EventBridge is a serverless event-driven service which provides connection to many other targets in the AWS cloud, which you can find here in this link. In this link you will find, for example, API gateway, CloudWatch logs, and so on, but today we are going to connect it to something else, which you will see later. Here in the bottom is described how to then actually set up the connection between AWS EventBridge and Stripe. And we will follow a few points of that manually first. So we will create it by clicking around. And then later I want to show you some AWS CDK source code, how you can automate some of those steps by just programming. First of all, we have to create an event destination. And this event destination is something we have to set up in our Stripe account. And as you can see here, it also says that for this, we can use a live account, which is actually our production account or sandbox. And for this test, we will create a sandbox account first because we don't want to use a live account since currently we don't have any products or actually no real service running here. So to do so, I went to my Stripe dashboard here, and to create a sandbox, you can click here on the top left on the burger menu and then open the sandboxes place. And then we have to create a new sandbox, which then will work for our test. So I will call this Stripe EventBridge Sandbox. And this one, we will just use the pre-configured one because then we don't have to do many manual configuration. If there's something you really need, probably you have to read the documentation of Stripe a little bit more and then use a blank sandbox. We're going to quickly create the sandbox. And here we are. In the sandbox, we can now do our connection to AWS EventBridge and then make everything work. To do so here, we can follow a few different steps by clicking around in the dashboard or by using API calls. For simplicity, we are doing it through the dashboard here. In principle, you only have to do the setup once. So as you did it, then you can forget about it. In principle, you can automate that, but yeah, you only have to do it once. So maybe let's go from here. To do so, we have to go to the Stripe workbench, which you find here in the developers place. And first of all, it's asking for some setup here. We are going to use workbench, and then we can go here to the webhooks category and add a destination. Please don't get confused. In the documentation, it says create destination, but somehow here it says add destination. This is what we want to do. Now here in this menu, you can choose between your account and connected accounts. We want to do it for our own Stripe account and not for other Stripe accounts. That's why we are just leaving it as your account, and then we are going from here. Here in the bottom, you can filter and select for many different event types you want to cover in your connection. However, I will limit today's video to only customer subscription events because this is probably also what people are mostly interested in. Customer subscription. And then here in the search bar, you can already see there is an event cost subscription created, deleted, paused, resumed, and updated. In the Stripe API documentation, you can read in detail what all the different webhook event types do and how to use them. We click on continue, and then we can here actually choose the destination type. You can also connect it to a general webhook endpoint, but here we are going to use AWS EventBridge as our destination because this is where we want to send the webhooks to. We click on continue and then we come here. This is now where we have to enter some sensitive information, which is the AWS account ID and then also the AWS region. In my account, I chose to put everything in the EU Central 1 region because this is the one which is closest to me, but you might change this. Here you can give your destination a name. I will just use the auto-generated one, and then you can also add some optional description here. Now I'm going to enter my account ID and we will create the destination. Now here it says that you have 7 days left to associate a partner event source. To do so, you just have to press the action button, and as long as you're logged into your AWS account already, you can now here see in the AWS Partner Event Sources tab on the bottom left, you can associate this with your event bus. This here is an auto-generated identifier, so we can just associate with event bus, and then we can choose that this event bus here has access to permissions of our organization, and then only my organization. We associate, and now here we can see that there's this partner event source. To finally verify whether this event bus has been connected, you can go to event buses here on the left hand side in AWS EventBridge, and then you can see here there is an AWS partner stripe.com test event bus. Then let's go back to the documentation and follow the other steps. So basically step 1 to 7, this is what we all did in the dashboard of our Stripe account already, so we can skip the following text. We also already associated the partner event source. This is the part that I also showed you already. We don't have to choose the region because we are already in the correct region. And yeah, this is there explaining here how to verify your partner event source. That's also what we did already. And the next part which we are now looking at is to create EventBridge rules. And this is what I want to show you now manually, but later we will dive into that in more detail by looking at some source code. So what we can do now is we go to the AWS EventBridge again here. So we go to AWS EventBridge, then we have the rules here on the left hand side. Then you have to make sure that for the event bus here you select the AWS event bus that you created, and then we can create a new rule here. So now here in the rules we can give the rule a name. So for example we can choose test rule, we can give a test description. This rule automates my business. And then we just have to make sure that the AWS partner event bus here is selected, and then we have a rule with an event pattern which is matching an event pattern which we can see in the documentation in a second. We go to next, and then we are going to use a pattern from a template which is provided, and then we can see here in the 6th step here, creation method, you should select EventBridge partners, Stripe, and all events. So here you use EventBridge partners, then we choose for search for Stripe, and in principle here you can now put all events or search for the customer subscription events which we already selected earlier. For our sake we will just use all events here to make it easier. As you can see here, this event pattern is created automatically. This event pattern is also important because this one is making sure that your events are matching the pattern from the EventBridge partnership. Then we click on next, and now we can just choose a target. So now we can, for example, just to make a small Hello World program, we can use a CloudWatch log group. We can see AWS events, and we can just call it My Business Automation. Then say next, and then we can give some optional tags, but we don't want to do that, so we just press next. We can review everything, and in the end create our rule. As you can see, now we have a new test rule. This rule is connected to our AWS EventBridge and can consume Stripe events, which are customer events. To test this now, we go back to our documentation, and here in the Stripe dashboard, trigger test events to our AWS EventBridge with our workspace, which I'm going to show you in a second. So now let's go back to our Stripe workbench and trigger some test events. This is also what you can see here already. You can choose send test events, and You can do something like Stripe login, Stripe trigger payment intent, and so on. So those are not helping us actually, because we were choosing other events earlier which were customer.subscription.something. So we have to do Stripe trigger and then our customer events. For example, we can now type here Stripe trigger customer.subscription, and we already get some suggestions here, and we are just going to simulate that there is a subscription that has been created. Then we trigger this event by pressing enter. And now you can see that Stripe is actually simulating a few commands, and then you can see the trigger has succeeded. And here we get some API outputs of everything which happened in the background. Now let's see in our CloudWatch whether we actually got some output in our target. Right? In our test rule, we defined that the output of the event should be written to a CloudWatch log, and this is what we are looking now. So we go to CloudWatch, to the log groups, and then we search for AWS events. And then here you can see now even my business automation as a log group, and we can find a log stream here, and this log stream contains an API call which comes from our Stripe event bus. Okay, now we have seen that we can set up a connection between AWS EventBridge and Stripe, and we can actually trigger events in our AWS cloud by Stripe events. And in the last few minutes, I want to show you how to set up this connection and creation of event rules, for example, using AWS Cloud Development Kit, which then makes everything in source code instead of clicking around in the dashboard. So if clicking around in the dashboard and creating rules manually is enough for you, probably you can already stop watching this video. If you are more interested in an even deeper technical dive, let's go to my Visual Studio Code. In the end, I wanted to give you a brief overview on how to use AWS CDK to connect your EventBridge that we created earlier in the video to other AWS services. In this example, we are going to create an AWS DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database, which we can use, for example, for storing subscriber data. And we will also create a state machine, which can trigger several AWS Lambda functions, which are going to modify the DynamoDB. This is just one example how you can use your EventBridge as an event source for AWS services. Here we are using state machines because they are really serverless, since they can trigger AWS Lambda functions running any kind of custom code you want to do. This repository is far from finished, so if you want to use any of that code, you can just use it for your own. You can get inspired. You can give me some improvement tips if you open some issues here, and then we can go from there. In the README, I briefly introduced how you can install and set up your CDK environment. In a future video, I will even more explain about how CDK works, what you have to do to use it, and so on. So if you want to use this repository, you can more or less follow those steps here. You only have to have access to an AWS account where you have to enter the ID here. In the rest of the README, I'm a little bit explaining the rest of the code for what it is, what it does, and how it is connected. The centerpiece is here our EventBridge stack, which is in principle importing the AWS EventBridge that we created for the partner Stripe source. To do so, we need the Amazon resource name of the EventBridge, which is imported here from a parameter, as well as the name of the EventBridge, which is also imported here from a parameter that you can create in your parameter store. Additionally, your EventBridge needs permissions to execute other services in AWS Cloud. So here we are creating an IAM role, and here we are going to add a policy to that IAM role, which allows for execution of a state machine that we create in another stack. All those details are not very important right now, because I will in the future also make some more videos about CDK and infrastructure as code. The only thing that you have to take away from this here is that you can basically define everything as code and then make it reproducible. Here in those lines now we define the Stripe event bus, which is imported from the ARN and from the name, and then we are creating the rule, which is used for the different subscription events from Stripe and connected to the AWS state machine here. As you can see, this is a little bit involved and this is an even more advanced topic. However, I will put this code onto GitHub so you can have a look at it if you're interested. If you want to have more information on CDK and other infrastructure as code topics, please feel free to drop a comment or add an issue in this repository and we can start a discussion here. As a last piece, let's quickly look into the app pie here, which is the centerpiece of the CDK application, where you can see that we are creating 3 different resources that I have mentioned earlier. There is the state machine, which is basically a tree of Lambda functions that can trigger and modify a DynamoDB table. Here, in the second part of the code, we actually create that DynamoDB table. And then in the third part, we are going to connect everything to AWS EventBridge as an event source. As I said, this is kind of advanced, and if you're more interested in that, you can dig through the documentation yourself. I will put some information about CDK, CloudFormation, and how to use it in Python in the description of this video. Otherwise, I'm happy if you would follow my channel to get more information on infrastructure as code, CDK, and other things related to that. Okay, that's it for today's video. I hope you could see how we can connect AWS EventBridge and Stripe and then consume events that are triggered from Stripe in our cloud solution. In our video now, we just used AWS CloudWatch to make the event content visible in our console. However, as you have seen from the CDK code example, you can make much more complex connections to other AWS services, such as step function state machines or others. If you are further interested in that and if you wanted to start looking into CDK, you can check out the code which I will upload to my GitHub. I will also make other videos in the future about AWS Cloud Development Kit and how you can use it for setting up your infrastructure in a declarative infrastructure as code way. If you are more interested in the cloud, in infrastructure as code or DevOps as a concept, please follow my channel, like and subscribe, and see you in the next video. Bye!